Welcome into the Trevor Staub Show, episode number 40. Today we have a very special guest. We have Cale Leiviska, one of the best touring professionals from the last decade or so. We're going to have Cale on to talk about the Preserve, about his playing career, and about Prodigy Disc Golf and how he came to co-found that. So let's hop right into the interview. All right, we welcome on our guest for the show this week. We have Cale Leiviska. Cale, thank you so much for joining the show.
Yes, sir. It's my pleasure, man. Thank you for having me. And I got to say, I was kind of doing some digging on your guys' show, and as a fellow business owner, I see and appreciate how hard you guys are working and how much content you guys are putting out. You guys are killing it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. So, kind of just to start off, what have you been up to this off season? How's it been going for you?
Oh man, it's been going great. My wife and I actually decided to move here down to Charleston, South Carolina for a couple months.
Yeah.
We've been talking about doing this for like 5 years now, and every winter we ended up staying in Minnesota. And for those of you that live in the upper Midwest know the winters are just brutal up there. I mean, it's essentially half of our year. So we came down here to Charleston in May for our birthdays and just fell in love with the place and decided, you know what, this is the winter. We're actually going to do it. We're gonna move down here, and so we're here until like mid-January on this little island called Folly Beach. It's just beautiful.
Nice. Yeah. Have you ever been able to check out the disc golf scene down there?
Absolutely. Like, luckily, we moved down here. We've been down here for about 3 weeks now. The first week that we got here was the Charleston Classic disc golf event, which is like their flagship disc golf tournament.
Yeah.
So the timing just worked out perfect, and not only was I able to play in it and play really well, but I was able to meet so many different people in the disc golf community down here. And I've been so plugged into the Minnesota community for decades now, so it's kind of cool to like be immersed in like a different city's community. And the Charleston Club has been very welcoming. And yeah, I played a few of the courses down here, and I'm just trying to play as much as I can while I got this good weather.
Yeah, yeah. It's certainly, when I was down there, I got to see firsthand that the Charleston community is very passionate about disc golf. It's a really cool community down there. So you mentioned you played a few courses. Have you played the legendary Park Circle yet?
No, I have not. I've had so
Okay.
many people tell me I got to get there.
Okay. It is one of a kind, I'll say. It basically plays around a giant roundabout. It's a very short course, but it's very unique. Like every single hole, in between the holes, you have to walk across a street, basically.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's something to check out for sure.
I definitely will. And like my local course, the course that I'm closest to, it's called James Island County Park.
Okay.
And like about 5 holes in, you got this big old pond, and there's a huge sign there that says "Beware of alligators." And
Yeah.
it's a little bit different than I'm used to in Minnesota, but no, it's been fun. And I was able to check out you guys' foundation shop up in North Charleston, which was
Yeah.
very nice, I must say. You guys are
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah, the Park Circle course is actually right next. It's pretty much right next to that shop, so it's kind of in that area. But yeah, well, it's cool you've been able to get away from the harsh winter in Minnesota. I'm sure if you're in Minnesota right now, you're kind of just playing in brutal cold and snow. So I'm sure that's definitely a nice break from that.
Yeah, I got to give a shout out to all my friends back in Minnesota who just got about 8 inches of snow
Oof.
yesterday. Sorry about that.
When you were in Minnesota during the off season, like how extreme of weather were you braving for the training in the off season? Like if it snows, is it like I'm done, or are you willing to play in a few inches of snow?
Well, it's just funny how relative like the weather is. It's like
Yeah.
when I was in my like early 20s, nothing was stopping me. We'd go out and play in 2 feet of snow. But then like as I get older now, and I kind of appreciate my off seasons a little bit more now as I get a little bit older.
Right.
So it's got to be high 20s, low 30s for me to want to get out and play. But saying that, there's a lot of diehard disc golfers up there. We closed down the preserve officially, like closed down our pro shop and stuff like early November.
Yeah.
And I'll go up there after not being up there for like 4 weeks, and I'll be just amazed with how many tracks in the snow I see from people playing. I mean, so I don't play as much in the winter, but there's a lot of diehards that do, that's for sure.
Yeah, it definitely it does definitely take a toll, especially once the snow gets there. It gets pretty difficult. A lot of people, even in Virginia, I grew up in Pennsylvania, so I know about the snow and that lifestyle. But you come down south
Yeah,
a little bit, and everybody's like, if it's below 35, I won't even go outside. So
I
it
know.
definitely changes. So one thing I want to do, my viewers love hearing when I have different guests on. They love hearing about the origins of my guest disc golf experience. They want to know. A lot of players, you know, been in the game for so long, and people don't really know how they got started in disc golf. They know about other things in their career. So I wanted to ask you first, how did you get started with disc golf, and how did that come about?
Well, I just, to take it way back, my whole life I've just been, pretty much obsessed with sports, playing, watching. Pretty much my whole childhood, everything I did, every single season was playing some kind of sport. I just, loved to compete, loved to play. And about my senior year in high school, there's this little 9-hole disc golf course like a mile from my high school at this park that we always used to go hang out at. And I kind of grew up, playing catch with the lid with my dad and my brother and stuff. So I could like throw a frisbee pretty well, but I always saw this course and there's hardly anyone out there at that time. And I always was like trying to get my buddies to let's go get some discs and let's try this game out. And after months and months of like trying to convince these guys, they finally said yes. And so we went out and played. We went and played Highland Park in St. Paul, Minnesota. And gosh, that was like halfway through my senior year of high school. And from then I was pretty much hooked. But I was still like playing a lot of sports and baseball at that time. So it wasn't really until I got to my freshman year of college down at Iowa State that I started like really starting to play every day. Um, yeah, and at that point, I was probably playing 2, 3 rounds a day. You know how it is when you first
Yeah.
get hooked.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, just getting into it with my buddies, and it wasn't for a few years after that, probably like 2003, 2004, when I realized that there's actually people playing tournaments and stuff. And at that point, I was completely hooked on the game, and yeah, started competing in events, and yeah, the rest is history.
Yeah, it's awesome. So many people have that similar story of like you just one time, you end up at the disc golf course, you try it out, and then it quickly siphons you in. And disc golf has this really amazing way of getting you from just playing your first round to playing a tournament in a really quick way. Like it doesn't take long at all to get plugged in and involved in disc golf, and I think that's part of the reason that the community is able to grow. But yeah, like you mentioned, you started playing MPO in 2004, and then you really started a tour around '06. As someone who's been on tour for such a long time, because you're at this point you're one of the longer time veterans on tour. There's not a lot of players who have made it from that early era of disc golf that you started into now. But as somebody who has, what are the craziest differences of that touring life back then when you first started to now when it's evolved so much?
I was kind of thinking about that the other day. It's funny that you asked that question because it's like, when I started playing, literally the courses were empty,
Yeah.
Even my home course in St. Paul, Highland Park, which you can't even go to on a weekend now because there's so many people that are trying to play. But when we started playing back then, the course was just empty. There was nobody out there. So it's like, the people that are getting into the game now are playing on packed courses that have stuff on YouTube to watch and kind of learn how to get better. Things were so different back then. There was nobody playing on the courses. Um, and when I think about the tournament scene back then, I was actually, kind of reflecting on this because I'm actually going to stay at Yuli's house tonight
Okay.
and go see his new home. But I was thinking of because Yuli and I used to travel together for years back in like the early days, like '08, '09, 2010, and it's like there's so many huge events now that all these top players are committed to. But back then, I remember we would just like pick small B tiers and stuff in random states and just kind of travel to them for the experience and just to compete. And like I feel like back then it was like it was just so much more grassroots. We were just playing because we loved it. There wasn't a ton of money in it. We were just like
Right.
just out of college trying to make a decent living and hit the road. But the differences was it's just like you know obviously these purses, the fields are so huge and so good now. But back then, I just remember it was us kind of just like traveling around, picking the states and places that we wanted to travel to, meeting a lot of people in the local disc golf communities, and just doing it for the love of it.
Yeah, it certainly has. I talked to Yuli at one point about his early touring days, and he would talk to me how it was just a matter of like tournament to tournament, would I have enough gas money to get to the next one? And, and
Yeah.
that's just kind of how it was back then. And it's incredible to see that in these days, what players are able to accomplish, and you've got guys making $1 million a year playing disc golf, and it's happened so fast. Like that, that's only like a decade or so ago where guys were not making anything playing disc golf, and it's really grown really quickly.
It
Um,
is, and I feel like I'm kind of like bridging the gap with my age and experience. I'm like bridging a gap from like the old generation to the new generation, and it's just
yeah,
been so fascinating to see, my peers and people that I'm friends with kind of, not only come up in the disc golf game, but come up financially and
sure,
just see the way things are changing and people are buying homes in the ocean, and
yeah.
it's just like, I remember Yuli used to stay at my house for weeks at a time back in the day, and now I'm going to be going and staying at his house this weekend. So we've all come full circle.
That is awesome to see, like, all of your friends and your peers in disc golf like really make it in the sport, because like back then it was just dreams, right? Like you talk about, oh, maybe one day this and that, but now it's really happening, and you're able to see players that you toured with back then become financially successful, and that's really cool. So you really became quite successful on tour. You won some big events during your career before taking a big step in 2013 when you co-founded Prodigy Disc Golf and Airborne Disc Golf. What led you to that decision to start your own disc golf companies and leap into the industry in a greater way than just being a touring professional?
So yeah, God, we got to take that back. That's about 10 years ago now, which is kind of crazy to
Yeah,
think about. But 2012, I'd have to start because that was like the first year I was really like going on tour full time. Okay, it was me and Felberg, Schustrick, and Nico. We kind of founded the nonstop disc golf tour, and Felberg bought an RV. We all hopped in there, and that like I had toured a bunch before then, but this was like the first time when I was like committed to it for months at a time,
right.
and we like felt a part of the growth of the game at that time. I remember we were playing a ton, we were teaching, we were going to schools and doing clinics and stuff, and I just felt like the game, like we were all personally on the brink of moving into something more serious. The game was kind of evolving at that time, and I had at that point I had been sponsored by Discraft for about 8 years,
Hmm.
and they always treated me very well. But at that time, I was really like involved with a group of people that were talking about starting a Prodigy disc and talking about paying players salaries and kind of just taking that next jump into the professional game. And so I was, it was exciting really exciting time to be a part of all that. And we launched Prodigy in 2013, and that was all in Georgia. And me being from Minnesota, I was kind of just looking at a way to like promote Prodigy essentially, because we had just dropped, and me and my buddy Jason, we had this idea of like, why don't we just start a pro shop in St. Paul, Minnesota? We'll make it like a lounge. We'll put up nets where people can throw and have putting challenges inside and stuff. Just kind of make a cool place, and we'll essentially sell Prodigy. And it was kind of my way to promote the brand. And you know, fast forward 10 years later, it turned into something that's so much more than just Prodigy. And now, we started running tournaments, designing courses. Now we have the preserve, but it all just started with us kind of trying to just build that brand, and we didn't really know what we were getting into. We didn't have much of a business plan at the time, and it just kept evolving into the website, and now, yeah, it's just turned into something that's just bigger than all of us.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Prodigy has certainly gotten massive, not even within the states, but also abroad in Europe. It has such a huge reach, and it's cool because when Prodigy first burst onto the scene, I was fairly new to disc golf at that time, around 2013, and I remember very distinctly because I was somebody who was always watching YouTube for disc golf content. As much as there was back then, there wasn't a lot, but I saw pretty much everything that was posted. And the original Prodigy team, I remember when the In the Bag videos first started coming out. But that original team I still regard as probably the greatest manufacturer-sponsored team of all time. You had yourself, Nico, Katrina, Big Jerem, Paige, Rick, Double G, Will Schustrick, Seppo, and Yuli. That team was insane. I mean, I remember seeing it and thinking, like, what in the world is happening? Like, this is the greatest team ever. Do you think there's ever been a team that compares to the talent level of that one? Because I asked Yuli about this a while back, and he said maybe some of the old Innova teams back in the day, but I'm not really sure of it.
I'm gonna have to say no. I mean, that was such an amazing, combination of talent and skill and desire, and it's just like, that that was like literally like when everything changed for the professional player as far as like salaries went. So I just think about the salaries we were getting back then, and it was pretty small, very relatively small to compared to what we're all getting now. But it was something, it was something that we
Yeah.
could count on at the first of every month. And, that was just so impactful. Like we went from nothing to something from day one just because of that team that we had. And,
Yeah.
obviously a lot of those players have come and gone and come and gone again. But, that really was the jump off point for it, kind of forced all these manufacturers to start paying these players salaries. And now, obviously the salaries are just insane for disc golf, which is just amazing. But yeah, it all started in 2013. Before that, people were just getting bonuses and royalties off their signature discs and stuff. There was no salaries, and now, to see where it's gone and to see what it obviously would have happened at some point anyway, but that was definitely the jump off point.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. It always takes one company or player to really push the disc golf scene to another step, and I think you're right. Prodigy was a team that certainly made a lot of moves towards the professional side and advancing the future of what that looks like. We've seen that with companies nowadays, releasing the details of player contracts. Like that's another thing that has advanced disc golf to where now all of a sudden there's that accountability for manufacturers. It's always, it takes somebody to make that leap to push the rest of the sport. And I think Prodigy was a really early and ambitious pioneer for that idea. But kind of moving back a little bit, one thing that I did find interesting about you is you mentioned you went to Iowa State, but you have a degree in conservation biology. Did you? So you got that degree before you started touring. You mentioned what was kind of what made you decide on that field of study?
Well, actually, my freshman year, I was actually in business management. That was like
Okay.
my major when I was a freshman. That's what I wanted to go into. And then after my freshman year, I moved back to Minnesota and was going to the University of Minnesota, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And, you know, I was always very passionate about the outdoors and science and life science and stuff like that. I grew up in northern Minnesota, kind of, it's called the Iron Range. And
Okay.
if you know people that know about Minnesota, we have 15,000 lakes up there. It's just beautiful forested country. So I was kind of always a person that spent my whole summers up in my cabin and just loved being a part of nature. So that was something that I was very passionate about. So I decided I was going to go into conservation biology. And it's funny because I've never had a job in the field per se,
Right.
but now that I'm doing so much course design and course building and stuff, I
Yeah.
get to use a lot of the forestry stuff that I learned in conservation biology, and I actually get to apply a lot of it now. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's really cool how that became full circle, getting that degree and now with the course design, being able to use that. How much do you mentioned it applies to course design, but like what parts of course design do you feel like you're really able to use your know-how from that degree?
A lot of the stuff, there's a couple different aspects. A lot of the stuff with the forestry, in Minnesota, we have tons of different kinds of trees and stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of the course building and stuff I do, we unfortunately have to take out some trees here and there, trim some branches. We have to know, like, for example, oak trees, in Minnesota, we can't cut or trim them, in the season when there's leaves on the trees because you can spread diseases that way. So you
Oh,
have to
okay.
wait until they're dormant, once the leaves fall to be able to do work like that. So like knowing things like that and just make sure we're protecting the forest. And then also, in Minnesota we have so many lakes and wetlands and stuff. So knowing a lot of the wetland flora and fauna and what's healthy, and a lot of like the forest floor stuff. Some of the areas that we work in are so thick, and us like doing some cleanup work, in the underbrush and stuff actually helps the trees. And so a lot of I can feel good about a lot of the stuff that we're doing on the with course design is such low impact development and actually kind of impacting the forest in a positive way.
That's awesome. It's really cool that you're able to use that degree in that way. And it kind of transitions me into your biggest course project, which is the Preserve, your gorgeous property up there in Minnesota. Certainly one of your coolest contributions to disc golf, and it's definitely on my bucket list to get up there. Hopefully next year.
Yeah,
Um,
you guys got to come this summer.
we're definitely it's definitely on our list. We want to get up there for sure.
Good.
Um, so how long had you been planning your own disc golf property before the opportunity of the Preserve presented itself?
How long? Gosh. Well, the first course that I designed was in 2009. And so
Okay.
I would have to say essentially from then, because once I did that first, went through that whole first process and built the course with my buddy Ross, I was pretty much thinking about it all the time.
Yeah.
Every road trip I'm on, every beautiful property that I drive by, I think about how nice the course would look out there. But I would have to say about, yeah, 2010, 2011 is when I really started the dream of like, okay, someday I'm going to have my own property. I'm going to build a disc golf sanctuary. I'm going to do something that's like, that's never been done before is kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Obviously there's been a few places. We have Blue Ribbon Pines in Minnesota, which kind of like set the stage for all pay to play disc golf in the Midwest essentially. But
Yeah.
um, once I started seeing properties like that, Maple Hill, uh, Sandy Point Disc Golf Ranch up in northern Wisconsin, people that were living the dream that I wanted, I knew that it was going to happen. I just didn't know when. And so, fast forward to 2020, we had been looking at this golf course since the previous summer, and it kind of seemed like it might be out of reach, and just didn't know if it was going to work.
Yeah.
And a lot of things happened in 2020 for us to be able to actually make this happen with this old golf course. And my gosh, it's just, it's been such a unbelievable dream come true. Having 180 acres, which is honestly almost too much land.
Yeah.
If I could go back, I'd probably be looking more in like the 100-acre range because
Right.
managing 180 acres is just so intense. But it's awesome. I have a great team up there. It keeps me very busy when I'm at home, and it makes it so that these off-season time down here is much more appreciated.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, and it's an amazing property. And you mentioned just the sheer scale of it, 180 acres. When it came to, you have the property, it's time to finally design. Having all that land and, land that has a ton of potential on it, really a gorgeous property. How overwhelming was it trying to figure out where do I want to put these courses?
That's a great question because it's like the place is so beautiful, it would honestly be kind of hard to mess it up. But I
Yeah,
did feel a lot of pressure because I'm like, okay, this is my one chance to do this. We have to do it right from the start. So literally, that's a really good question because those first few weeks, I remember having a lot of sleepless nights of me just laying in bed thinking about, okay, well, what if we ran the layout this way? What if we ran it that way? It actually was kind of a lot of pressure because we have so many cool water features in the property. So what I
yeah,
wanted to do was, so originally we wanted to build two courses to start. I wanted more than that, but for that first year, I wanted to do two courses. So what I wanted to do is make sure that we incorporated all the best water features and had very interesting aspects to the courses on both of the courses. So coming up with the flow and doing that was tough with that much land, to be honest. I mean, it's just there's so much space out there. It's hard to pick the best spots to make these two courses. And now in the second year, we ended up building a third course, which is called the Red Fox, which is like our kind of wooded, shorter course. But
yeah.
um, it's a lot. It's a lot of space. But honestly, I would have to be just a terrible designer to mess that property up.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is a very cool piece of land. So now that you have three courses on the property, how many acres do you feel like you have less left? And do you actually want to attack putting more courses on the property or kind of stick to three and move them around?
3 is a good number because it allows us to have events on the weekends and still have courses open for the public.
Yeah.
It has been really nice, but we do want to open up a fourth.
Okay.
I ended up leasing another like 30 acres of forest along the Mississippi, so it's right adjacent to our property. So we do have a lot more
Okay.
space to use, but this area is very heavily wooded, so it's going to be very work intensive and take a lot of cutting and stuff like that to build these fairways. So it's not something that we're going to jump into. We're kind of just like doing it slowly. And now that next year will be the fourth year of the Preserve Championship, a lot of my time is spent kind of building new holes for that course, which is called the
Yeah.
Black Bear, which is like essentially the
Okay.
whole property. making tweaks to existing holes, building new holes. That's kind of been like taking most of our focus this year, but eventually we'll build a fourth for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah. One thing I was curious about with course design, when you're dealing with a property that previously existed as a golf course. So in that case, you see there's already essentially a layout to the property that exists, right? Because there's fairways, greens, bunkers. How difficult is it? Is it make it more helpful or more confusing when trying to make a disc golf course layout when a layout already exists? As far as like, is it hard not to get caught up with just playing along the fairways and seeing other layouts when there's something like that?
Man, that's another great question. So it's like, okay, I've done a lot of course design on disc golf courses that are on ball golf courses, right? That are
Yeah.
existing golf courses. So with those, you don't get to be as creative because there's a flow that you have to follow on the golf course for safety
Right.
and everything like that. But with our property, I there were some aspects that I looked at, like we're like in a floodplain because we're on the
Mm.
Mississippi River. So like a lot of the tee areas were built up, a lot of the greens were built up. We have these kind of natural features that they already built for us that I definitely wanted to use and utilize correctly, but I tried to like not think about like the flow of the golf course at all and just like completely start fresh.
Yeah.
There are some holes where it just makes sense on our property to kind of use the flow of the golf hole, and some where it didn't. Some of the greens were just beautiful built up greens, but I thought, okay, what if we played it from this direction instead of this direction? What if we carried the water from over here instead of like the regular golf flow? And
Yeah.
obviously it's a different game, and sometimes it made sense and sometimes it didn't. And also, most of our course was open, but the whole perimeter was just heavily forested. So trying to find ways to kind of jut in and out of the trees, kind of to create that balance, that was something that was very important when we were starting.
Right. Yeah. That totally makes a lot of sense. I think um, there are there are certainly a lot of course designers that are getting better of that idea of making a disc golf course on those golf courses and really trying to avoid just throwing down the fairways, because I know that was originally when we started playing on golf courses, especially on the tour, there were some courses where you'd be like, oh my goodness, like here we go down the fairway, back up the fairway.
Right.
But I think it started to change a lot to where there are a lot of those courses that I really enjoy now, because I think the designers have gotten better. And I think there are some aspects that are really cool on golf courses, like the bunkers. I think bring something interesting to play. The built up greens, like you mentioned, and some of the up shots get really tricky. So I think it is cool having it on those properties. One thing I think is interesting is that we're starting to see more private pay to play courses emerge across the country, with some like the Preserve being featured on the tour. Do you think this model of course is the future of the game at the top level, all across the game, or is this just something that's going to be kind of a niche thing?
No, I do think it is going to be more and more a part of the game. Like I'm trying to think. For example, what is it? The OTB. They're on a golf course that they have to
Hmm.
rent out. The Portland Open is on that Glendoveer golf course that they have to rent out. And
Yeah.
those are fantastic, beautiful courses, but we're only in there for a week or two each year.
Right.
There's still a golf course. It's still a different use on that property. I just feel like, with places like the Preserve and Maple Hill that are just, built specifically for disc golf, the only people out there are disc golfers. It's just a completely different vibe. It's so much more special for all the touring players that come on site to those places, I feel like. So, and honestly, I believe like in from talking to a lot of my peers, I know that within 5 years, there's going to be a handful more of the top pros that will have properties. Like I can
Oh
guarantee
wow.
that. I know, I don't know if people want me saying all this, but I know Sexton is he was a huge supporter of the Preserve from day one. He's always asking questions about how we're doing, and he's been just awesome to talk to. I know he wants to open up a property eventually. I've talked to Simon about it, him opening up something on the
Yeah.
East Coast. I've talked to Yuli. I've talked to Humphreys and Perkins about doing some stuff down in Texas. So I really wouldn't be surprised in 5 years if a lot more players, take this model, make it happen. Because like who wouldn't want to travel out to the West Coast to
Right.
to a course that Sexton owns, or who wouldn't want to go do something that Simon owns? I mean, it's such a cool thing, and they see how successful the Preserve has been. And, I just think the business model obviously works, and the way disc golf is growing and the way people support these players, I think it's just a no-brainer. And obviously, how rewarding it's been for me personally, like, and professionally, to be able to have a business like that, or something that I like care so much to put that much time into. It's like I work up there a ton, but it never feels like work to me. It's a place
Yeah.
I enjoy being, and it's something I can really leave my mark in the disc golf world.
Yeah, seeing more of those courses pop up would certainly be really cool, and seeing them designed and created by experienced touring pros would be even cooler because then these are guys who have played everything across the country. They know what the best courses should look like, and I think that'll be really awesome for the future of the sport. So one kind of last thing I wanted to bring up is I was watching a few of your in the bag videos. There's not too many of them out there, but I know there was one in 2019 with Prodigy. And I noticed that you like to name your discs, which I thought was really cool. And in this one in particular, you had them named related to Game of Thrones weapons or
Yeah,
characters. So are you still naming your discs? Do they all have a name in your bag?
I do. I don't know, when did I start doing that? That must have been like 6 or 7 years ago. I'd always write my name on my disc, but then I started with just a couple of them, and I started naming them. And then, growing up as a baseball player, I'm very superstitious when it comes to
Yeah,
sports. I don't know why. It's
it's a
stupid,
baseball
but
thing.
exactly. So I just like, now, if a disc is in my bag for competition, that's like kind of how I initiated into the bag, is kind of come up with a name for it.
Okay.
So like, I'll play, a couple practice rounds with the disc, trying to figure out if it's going to make the bag or not. And once I realize it is, that's when I, sit down, have a moment, give it a name, try to give it a little personality, and
Yeah,
for me, it works.
I like that. Are you still using Game of Thrones, or is there a few other themes now going in your bag?
Yeah, no, I started with Game of Thrones, and now, depending on what book I'm reading, what characters I'm kind of reading about or watching in movies at the time and take a liking to, I've kind of branched off a little bit, but still
Okay.
heavily Game of Thrones
Is
related.
there a favorite name of one of the discs in your bag?
A favorite name, man, you got some good questions, Trevor.
Thanks.
Okay, so I have a blue M4 that I've had in my bag for like 8 years. Nico LaCastro actually gave it to me. It's one of his stamps,
Okay.
and that's like probably my most birdied disc easily of all time. And I named that one after Arya's sword Needle because it was always just straight as an arrow. So
Yeah.
that one, that's Needle, and that's what I think of every time I grab it. So I'd have to say that one.
That's a good one. I think I've definitely had some discs that I kind of nickname, and I think it is fun to have discs that are super like personal to you in your bag. It makes them special, but it also does make it very painful when you lose them because
Oh, big time.
you feel certainly attached to them. I also noticed it's really cool that you took that idea of naming discs into your new signature line with Prodigy. You have the Shadowfax, the Falcor, and the Strider, and each of them kind of have their own name from something that you enjoy, whether I think these ones are Lord of the Rings and The Neverending Story in particular. But for future molds for that line, are you planning on making more molds for that line first? And then are there some names that you've kind of already thought of, or is it something that you like to do once you feel the disc?
So yeah, this whole process has been so fun, being able to kind of create and have like the artistic, say over it and the names and stuff. But when we started this out, my goal was to have 4 discs. So I wanted to have the high speed driver, fairway driver, and mid range, which we now have, and then also have a putter.
Okay.
So I do have a name for the putter when it's ready. I've been thinking about it for a long time, but it
Okay.
doesn't look like that putter is probably going to be out until probably this fall at the earliest.
All right. All right.
There's so much stuff that we're working on, and that Prodigy's working on right now and stuff. So having my 3 discs is great for now, and the putter's kind of been put on the back burner for probably another few months.
Okay.
But yeah, we've already kind of started doing the development, and I do have the name when it's ready. So hopefully, no one else takes that name in the next like 9 months.
Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of nerve wracking once you like have a disc planned out, just hoping like nobody makes that disc or that name like anything similar.
Well, you know what? So, right, like, okay, I came out with Falcor this spring, right?
Yeah.
And that was so huge for me. It was my first disc. I was so excited. People were loving the disc. Not more than 1 month later, I look at the PDJ website, and it says Franklin Disc Sports creates
Yeah.
Falcor, and they
Yeah.
spelled it different. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I just came out with this, and I was like literally calling the PDJ. I'm like, how'd you let them come up with this name? And they're like, well, we don't have any say in the names. We're just looking at the specs of the disc. But I thought that was funny. But I haven't seen a Franklin Falcor yet, so hopefully people are
Yeah.
buying these ones instead of those.
Yeah, I guess so. They early to get the approval, but they were late to get the manufacturing of the disc, I
Right.
guess. So you beat them there. That's where it matters. All right, one last thing before I let you go. I've had a few different Prodigy team members on. I think most recently was Gannon, but I want to get your top three Prodigy molds, your favorites. I think I know what number one will be, but let's get your favorites and let's exclude your line of discs because I know that'll be a little bit biased.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Number one, I'd have to say M4. That's one
Figured.
I've been throwing from the get. I think
Yeah.
it's a very unique, beautiful disc that I use in the woods. I don't throw it a ton in the open, but in the woods, it's just like the perfect hyzer flip disc. Gotta say M4. The A5 is this new approach disc that we came out with last year,
Yeah.
and it's a very overstable, slow disc. Similar to the Zone that I threw when I was with Discraft all those years ago. A5 is just perfect. I call it my cheat code because even when it's windy, I know exactly what it's going to do. I rarely mess up that disc. And the third one, gosh, I'd have to say I'm really loving the FX3 a ton lately.
Okay.
I have a overstable FX3 that I can kind of put a little S on, and then I have my beat-in one that I can throw straight, and even if I throw it nice and hard, it'll hyzer flip up for me. It's essentially like if I need a disc a little bit more overstable than the Shadowfax, that's what I go with. So I'll go with those
Nice.
three.
Good picks. Good picks. Yeah, I think I've thrown all of them. All of them are very solid molds. Can confirm. Those M4s especially are incredible, especially
My
once you get them
baby.
seasoned.
Yep.
But anyways, Kale, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for talking with me and joining the show.
Yeah. Thank you, Trevor. I appreciate the insightful questions. You're the man.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. All right, and thanks once again to Cale for joining the show. It was really cool hearing from him about his disc golf story and all the cool things he's been doing with Prodigy and the Preserve. If you haven't checked out the Preserve, obviously getting out to Minnesota might not be the easiest thing for you, but even just watching it on YouTube, it's really an incredible course, something that I want to visit for sure. But we're going to have another great guest next Thursday. Make sure to be back here to check that out, and we'll see you then.